Hi everyone, welcome back to Extra Credit, and this is our 16th episode on ancient Rome. So last time we saw how in 180 AD, the golden age of the 5 good emperors came crashing down with the rise of the wicked emperor Commodus. Commodus was a really nasty piece of work who's famous for all the wrong reasons, but you don't need me to tell you about all that because you've already seen Joaquin Phoenix do an amazing job playing him in Gladiator, which I'm pretty sure you've all seen about 15 times already, so there's really no need for me to tell you. Wait, you mean these kids haven't seen Gladiator? Okay, so apparently you guys haven't actually seen Gladiator, but that's probably for the best because it is rated R for violence, and you really should make those kinds of entertainment choices in conversation with your parents. Just like the time when I was a 10-year-old and my parents let me watch Jaws because they said it wouldn't scare me. But my therapist says I should forgive them. So with the rise of Commodus in 180 AD, the golden age of Rome did come to an end, but it's not like it all came crashing down overnight. Commodus ruled for about 12 years before he was finally murdered in his own bathtub, and it's at that point that things really started to fall apart. His death in 193 AD kicked off another civil war in which 5 different men competed for the job of emperor, and which is why historians call this year the Year of the 5 Emperors. Still killing it, guys. The eventual winner of this war was a guy from North Africa named Septimius Severus, who began a new dynasty called the Severan dynasty that lasted until 235 AD and provided the empire with pretty decent stability up to that point. However, in 235 AD, when the last of the Severan rulers died, Rome really did enter the darkest period of its history up to this point. In fact, the 3rd century was a time of such crisis for Rome that historians have given it the name the crisis of the 3rd century. That pretty much sums it up. And just a side note, if you're thinking, hey, why is this called the crisis of the 3rd century when it's happening in the 200s AD? Shouldn't this be the crisis of the 2nd century? Clearly you weren't paying attention during our class on historical dating, so 10 points from Gryffindor. So to get into the details, the amazingly named crisis of the 3rd century affected Rome from 235 AD until 284 AD, and during that time of almost 50 years, there were 3 major factors at work: political instability, economic collapse, and imperial breakdown. In the first category, the Roman government was on really shaky ground during this time because the position of emperor became like a revolving door. Specifically, during the 50 years of the crisis, Rome went through a grand total of about 22 emperors during that time, which, if you're doing the math, means that most of those guys only ruled for a couple of years, and in some cases only a couple of months, before they were killed off by their next rival. Basically, it makes Game of Thrones look like Sesame Street. In the second category, the empire experienced a devastating economic collapse during this time due to a little something called inflation. And if you're not sure what inflation is, just go ask your mom and dad how fun it is buying milk and gas these days. To break it down a bit, the government was in trouble because the money was losing its value over time due to the fact that the emperors kept on removing silver from the coins in order for the government to help make their financial ends meet. Eventually it got so bad that money became completely worthless and people had to actually trade goods with each other like it was Canada in the 1640s. Which maybe isn't a bad idea. I mean, after all, my wife's sewing machine is worth about as much as the Lego Colosseum, and I would totally trade that any day. Finally, in the third category, Rome faced a series of internal and external emergencies that threatened to tear the empire itself apart. In the east, they were attacked by the enemy Persian Empire, as well as by a foreign queen named Zenobia, who managed to steal a whole bunch of provinces from the Romans, like Syria, Palestine, Egypt, and parts of Asia Minor, i.e. modern-day Turkey. At the same time, in the west, 3 other provinces, namely Britain, Gaul, and Spain, tried to ditch the empire for good by declaring their independence from Rome. All of this while Germanic invaders poured over the borders and attacked Greece, even sacking the ancient city of Athens, and then threatening Italy itself. But as disastrous as all this was, the true low point came in 260 AD, when the Roman Emperor Valerian was captured by the Persians and was forced to spend the rest of his life bending over so the Persian king could use him as a human footstool when mounting his horse. That's right, in just a few short decades, the emperor has gone from being a living god to a living piece of furniture. Now, with all of these catastrophes swirling, you could be forgiven for thinking that this was finally when Rome bit the dust and our series comes to a tragic end. But just like in Star Wars, the Empire strikes back. In this case, in the year 270 AD, the greatest emperor you've never heard of came swooping in a Gwaihir-style rescue moment to save the day. His name was Aurelian, and even though he only ruled for 5 short years, he still managed to set himself apart during that time as one of the all-star MVP emperors ever. In a series of lightning victories, he won back all of Rome's eastern provinces, defeated Queen Zenobia, pushed the barbarians out of Greece and Italy, and then brought Britain, Gaul, and Spain back into the empire. Top that, Michael Jordan. On top of all that, he also built the first ever major defensive wall around the city of Rome itself, in case future attacks should come closer to home, which, spoiler alert, they will. But even though Aurelian had managed to pull Rome back from the brink of disaster in spectacular fashion, and had shepherded Rome through its worst military disaster since the Battle of Cannae 500 years ago, there was still a whole lot of work to be done before the empire could truly be on solid footing once again. And that was the work that would belong to the next major emperor, Diocletian, whose reign, beginning in the year 284 AD, would finally bring the crisis of the 3rd century to an end and bring Rome back to at least a measure of peace and stability. On the economic side, Diocletian managed to help the inflation crisis by restoring value to Roman coins and also increasing the efficiency of tax collecting so the government actually had some valuable money in its bank accounts again. But it's on the political side that Diocletian made the most fateful decision of his career, and which would cement his legacy in Roman history forever. You see, Diocletian was the first emperor to truly deal with the awkward elephant that had been in the room since at least the time of Trajan, namely that the empire was just getting far too big for any one person to control effectively. And it was this realization that led Diocletian to create a new system of government that later historians dubbed the Tetrarchy. What he did was to split the empire into 2 halves, east and west, and then install not 1 but 2 emperors in each of those halves, therefore giving the Roman Empire a grand total of 4 emperors at one time, also called tetrarchs. The senior emperor in each half was called the Augustus, and the junior emperor was called the Caesar, and in theory they were all supposed to be able to share the responsibilities of ruling together so that the empire could be run more efficiently and effectively, with the key words being, in theory. Under this new system, Diocletian became the new Augustus of the Eastern Empire, which was actually far richer and more prosperous than the Western half. Remember that the eastern part of Rome's empire contained the enormously wealthy cities of ancient cultures like the Egyptians, the Greeks, and Middle Eastern peoples, so ruling in the east was a pretty sweet gig. By comparison, the western part of the empire was gradually coming to be seen as a kind of backwoods, with Rome as a sort of imperial hick town, although, you know, a hick town with triumphal arches and aqueducts and a colosseum. And nothing illustrates this growing chasm between East and West more clearly than the fact that Diocletian himself spent almost his entire 21-year reign in the eastern part of the empire and only visited the city of Rome itself once during his entire time in power. In other news, Diocletian is also famous for launching the last major persecution of Christians in the history of Rome, making one final attempt to stamp out this faith forever, and in the understatement of the millennium, it didn't quite work out. Finally, in the year 305 AD, Diocletian set one more record as emperor by becoming the first ruler of Rome ever to retire willingly and walk away from power while still alive. Which, considering the record of the last 50 years, was probably a smart choice. After the stresses of life on the throne, Diocletian retired to his palace in the modern-day country of Croatia, where he also enjoyed spending time tending his amazing vegetable garden. And as he lovingly pruned his cucumbers, Diocletian could reflect on the fact that after a half-century of chaos and calamity, Rome was finally back on its feet again, ready to live happily ever after. Because, I mean, dividing up supreme power between 4 wealthy, ambitious noblemen, each with their own personal army, what could possibly go wrong? Hey everyone, thanks for watching Extra Credit. It's a great time making this show as always, and a big thanks especially to those of you who have managed to stick with this series so far through all 16 episodes. Your challenge for this week is to figure out what happened to the Emperor Valerian after his untimely death and his usage as a human footstool for the Persians. As always, keep fit, have fun, read a book, and we'll see you next time.